Hey folks, Brian Bledsoe once again here with your monthly update as we head into the middle part of January. Thought it'd be best to kind of look back through the past 30 days and show you what's been going on. And some of us have seen a great deal of moisture in the past 30 days, obviously with some blizzard conditions northward across parts of the Central Plains. And then we obviously had that big rain event back in December down across parts of the Texas Panhandle. Not everybody has been blessed with the best moisture. You still see far southwest Texas, southeast New Mexico kind of lagging behind there just a little bit. But by and large, a lot of folks saw some great moisture over the past month or so, and let's hope that it's going to continue around here. In terms of what we're looking at over the next couple of weeks or so, this is the forecast precipitation anomaly for the next 2 weeks, and you do see some better prospects coming back into far west, central, and southwest portions of Texas, as well as southeast New Mexico. I do think the lion's share of the heaviest rain and whatever wintry type precipitation eventually takes place up across Oklahoma is that the farther east you go, you're going to have some better totals out of this deal. And you can see that across south central and southeast Texas, kind of knifing its way northeastward up across the Red River into central parts of Oklahoma. So still a pretty active weather pattern the farther south you go. And the farther southeast you go, but certainly not a bad weather pattern really for anybody. And if we extend this, again, this was the most recent run here of the Euro Weeklies model that takes us out over the next month and a half. You could see that it's projecting a very active weather pattern across most of the south central part of the United States that extends all the way northward up to around I-80. So, again, this kind of just goes with the theme of while El Nino is present, especially during the months of January and as we head into February, things inevitably will be fairly active in terms of moisture during that time frame, and hopefully we can kind of carry this over a little bit further. But by and large, I would say at least the next 2 weeks and then beyond, a fairly favorable situation exists across most of the southwest and south central portion of the United States. In turn, it's also going to make for some colder than average conditions too. You could see the temperature forecast anomaly for the next month and a half shows values running on the order of about 2 to 4 degrees Fahrenheit below where we should be for this time of year. And in some cases, up there across parts of Colorado, some of those areas running about 5 degrees Fahrenheit below average. Again, that's also very typical for El Ninos, that the first half of El Nino winter is fairly mild, and then the shoe drops during the back half of the El Nino winter, and that's when we actually start to see some wintry conditions. So that's kind of where we are right now and where we are likely to go over the next 2 weeks to 6 weeks in terms of the overall forecast. Now, what are we looking at in terms of the Pacific Ocean here? And this is the latest update in terms of sea surface temperature anomalies. We still have a very warm El Nino region going on right there, but that is starting to be a little bit weaker than the maps that we had shown previously. I think this El Nino has probably maxed out. It's probably going to linger for a little while longer and then start to go away. Our PDO is still on the cold phase there off the west coast of North America. And I think that we could really start to see a rapid decay of this El Nino once it starts. In fact, this is the Euro seasonal model sea surface temperature anomaly forecast. And you can see for the next few months or so, it goes rapidly from El Nino right there in the first image to going away to neutral, and then blue starting to show up there off the west coast of South America. That will inevitably be the La Nina that starts. This takes us through June, I believe, with this temperature, sea surface temperature anomaly map. So you can see there's going to likely be a fairly rapid transition here in the ENSO region, going from full-blown El Nino to neutral, and then eventually starting to see La Nina conditions develop. The NMME model, which I'm going to show you right here, is much faster with that transition. Okay, we'll re-rack it. We'll start now. You can see where it is, and by about the month of May, right there, you could see all of that blue starting to show up there in the ENSO region, west of South America. This is the rapid transition that I've been harping on now for the past several months, really, that we would likely go from an El Nino to a La Nina. The time schedule on this is still kind of up in the air. I think this evolution could be a little bit fast. And by fast, I mean the model is making the transition and hurrying it along a little bit too quickly. I think that might be a little bit slower. But one thing's for certain, the modeling information and the historical information that I've been focusing on all show the decay of the El Nino, neutral conditions, and then we go to La Nina. At the latest, probably the back half of this year. And at the earliest, we could see La Nina conditions starting to fire up as we head into the spring. So this is definitely something we're going to watch. I've harped on this at length with you folks for quite some time, and how I really tried to stress that how we started 2024 was not going to be how we finished 2024 in that regard. So what I've done is I've looked back through history and I put together some analog years where we've transitioned from El Nino to La Nina. Now, I don't think that transition happens before May. So I've put this in line to go from May afterwards. So we've done a little bit of a slice here from May to September, and what the precipitation anomalies look like during all of those years when we saw an El Nino to a La Nina transition. Okay, and you can still see that the moisture was still present across south central and southeast Texas, eastern Kansas, on up into parts of the Corn Belt, but it's unmistakable the drying trend that was starting there in eastern New Mexico, going up through West Kansas, parts of eastern Colorado. And if we take, say, the May out of this equation, those higher end precipitation anomalies that were wetter than average across south central Texas go away. All right. So I'm trying to build this in here for where I think the better transition period will take place. And if we look at what happened from September to December of those years in terms of precipitation anomalies, well, we really dried things out, not just in Texas, New Mexico, and the Western High Plains, but all along the Gulf Coast and into the Southeast. That's very typical when we see an El Nino to a La Nina transition. So I think what the groundwork is being laid here, that we need to really capitalize on an active weather pattern and the moisture that we get from now until May, because after that, things become a whole lot uncertain. And really, the back half of this year, or the last, say, third of this year, I think the drying trend really starts to kick into high gear. So that may not be what anybody wants to hear, but that's still kind of what I think is going to happen. What I've done here is done the May through December precipitation anomalies that averaged out on all these years. And you can see the dryness that really starts to show up there across New Mexico, western Kansas, a large part of Texas, and the Gulf Coast region. Okay. So, again, I really want to capitalize on the remnants of this El Nino, the pattern that will inevitably take place on the back part of this El Nino and into neutral conditions before we get into La Nina. And we likely start to see that drier than average signal start to show back up. And that's what history says. So, let's see what the computer model information suggests. All right. So this is the forecast for February for the Euro seasonal model. Again, the greens wetter than average, the browns drier than average, and it still does okay right there across most of Texas, southeast New Mexico, even northward into eastern Colorado, western Kansas, California actually ends up being fairly active, as does most of the Gulf Coast and the southeast. So for February, pretty status quo with this pattern, and that's kind of what I showed you with that 45-day outlook a little bit earlier in this video. So not a ton to worry about, I don't think, through February. Into March, we see wetter than average conditions in certain parts of the region, but there are some drier than average things that are starting to show up there and bleed in. Nothing crazy right now, but especially if we do well in February, but certainly something that we'd have to pay attention to if the signal starts to get a little bit stronger. In April, you see it kind of goes away. A lot of wetter than average conditions across most of Texas, Kansas, the Gulf Coast region. Again, this would probably be the last big hurrah from the El Nino type pattern before we start to see the shift that takes place during the month of May. But even during May, you still see the Euro model here is forecasting a lot of wetter than average conditions across most of Texas and points eastward. Now, the Texas Panhandle might be a little bit different. All right. We're going to have to see how this plays out. The one thing that I'm less concerned about, okay, is that if we shove moisture in the ground, it pushes back the drying trend that will likely take place a little bit later on this year. So that's why I say it's really important that we shove a lot of moisture in the ground while we have this pattern, because the forecast for June with the Euro model takes a lot of that away. We start to see this drier than average signal set up there across basically all of the plain states. It actually goes up into parts of the northern Rockies. In stark contrast from what the spring was. And even into the month of July, you see a large part of New Mexico, central Texas, Colorado, parts of western Kansas. Again, that drier than average signal really starts to kind of firm up there just a little bit. So again, when we look at history and then we look at the models, and kind of shows that trend taking place. I have another model to show you, which is the NMME model. This is the forecast for precipitation anomalies during the month of February. And you can see nothing crazy there, mostly average across most of Texas, a little wetter than average across parts of the Gulf Coast and Southeast. If we look at March, a little bit drier than average right there across the southern plains, no question about that. But if we go to April, you can see a little bit of a breakdown in north central Texas. Nothing screaming dry right there. But keep in mind, the NMME model was the model that was forecasting the La Nina to come on a lot sooner than what the Euro was. So again, I think we have to reevaluate this. And if we see a rapid decay and breakdown of El Nino here in the next month or so, then we might have to look at this NMME solution and say, hey, we might see these drier than average conditions start to show up a little bit more quickly than others. This is the forecast for May from the NMME model, but again, it has full blown La Nina going in its forecast here. That's why the dry signal really shows up there across Texas and the Four Corner states. Okay, June, very much the same story, but again, it's got the La Nina going full blower. For July, it breaks down a little bit, but I think the July breakdown here, especially across central, southeast Texas along Gulf Coast, is the fact that we're probably going to have a banger of a hurricane season coming up. Okay, the decay of El Nino and the transition toward La Nina usually makes for a more active than average hurricane season, and I really believe that's what that forecast signal is there for July across most of central, southeast Texas and the Gulf Coast. And then if we look at August, you're kind of doing the same story. A little wetter than average the farther south and southeast you go, and then that drier than average bullseye sets up there across eastern Colorado and western Kansas. But keep in mind, if this La Nina transition that the NMME model is forecasting is too fast, these drier than average anomalies would certainly be readjusted, okay, going forward. One more model that I want to show you is the IRI. This is February, March, and April. Again, it doesn't have a tip to one way or another across most of Texas, mostly average in terms of precipitation there. And then if we look at April, May, June, you do see a dry signal starting to show up there across the western part of Texas, simply because during the back half of that trend, okay, probably by June, that's when we're going to start to see those drier than average conditions show up due to the oncoming La Nina conditions. So again, folks, nothing has really changed in terms of the overall transition that I've been forecasting going forward. Okay. I think we're okay on the front end of this forecast, but I'm really concerned about the back half of this forecast when La Nina takes over, because not only is the PDO still negative, which I've been telling you about now for a long time, but the PDO being negative makes it that much easier for La Nina to come back and be reinforced and obviously set up with that dry signal across the southern plains first, and then it starts to migrate northward, and that's when you really start to build back some regional dryness and regional drought conditions. So fingers crossed we can keep things going in terms of good moisture over the next few months or so, but we definitely have to be planning for drier conditions, I think, on the back half of that. As always, if you have any questions, please let me know. You got my phone number, you got my email right there. But if I don't hear from you in the next several days, I will be speaking to you again in February. Be well.